Hi, and welcome back to Execution Insights. Over the past several months, a new dimension of my coaching work has kind of quietly opened up, and I wanted to talk about it today because I thought it might be valuable. Now, I can't point to a single moment that caused it. Nothing dramatic happened. I didn't change my approach or my messaging or my marketing. And yet, it doesn't feel accidental. What I'm talking about is that I've suddenly found myself coaching remarkably talented managers, not senior leaders as I normally do, but a whole group of brilliantly dedicated, passionate managers. Now, these are people who care deeply about their work and they care about their teams and they're doing things in the right way. But the key is that every one of them is preparing to step into an executive role. They're looking forward to what's next. And for almost all of them, that represents the next meaningful step in their career progression. But what's really surprised me the most isn't their capability. They've got that. It's how personal this transition has been. In fact, almost every one of them has said some version of the same thing to me during a coaching session. They say, Jim, I thought I was ready for this, but it's way harder than I expected. And I want to share with you that, from my perspective, it's not because the work is beyond them or because they're failing. They're not. They're incredibly talented. It's because this transition from manager to executive asks for something deeper than just learning new skills. In fact, I think at the core, it asks for a shift in identity. You see, as a manager, your value is really visible. Every single day, you solve problems, you help people on the team, you produce results yourself, and you can kind of pause at the end of the day and say, I can see exactly how I mattered today. Now, for just a moment, I have to share with you a really early experience in my own career was working for a manager who told our entire team at the end of every day, you should be able to put everything you produced on the top of your desk so that I could just walk by and see how productive you were. Well, obviously, that's a narrow mindset, and it's also quite out of date for today's world. But I want to share with you that if you're a manager, that mindset kind of makes sense. You should be able to see your contribution clearly and directly. And I have to also say, even though I didn't like that manager's advice for a long time, it kind of shaped how I understood my own value. In other words, if I couldn't see it, I couldn't measure it, probably didn't matter. But as you move into the executive leadership role, something quietly but significant starts to change. Your impact becomes far harder to measure. And even though it's more impactful in the beginning, well, that can feel really unsettling, even lonely, questioning your existence or your value. But I want to share with you in this message today that those feelings, that restlessness, that doubt, even a quiet sense of emptiness aren't signs that something's wrong. In fact, they are signals that are pointing to the fact that the way you once understood your value just no longer fits the role you're stepping into. And what matters most now as an executive is that you don't lose your way, that you don't lose heart, that you make this transition in a seamless and powerful way so that when you step into that executive role, you're ready for it. So to help you in this episode of Execution Insights, I want to share the 3 most impactful inner shifts that I've watched managers make as they step into an executive role. Now, let me be clear, every one of them did it slowly and carefully and with a great deal of courage. But it was, in my view, these 3 shifts that enabled them to kind of arrive safely in their new executive position. And I'm offering them to you today as questions that I hope can enable you to find your own deep answers. So the first shift is you have to refine your involvement so that it never limits the ability of others to grow. Will you let that sink in just for a minute? You and I have to adjust and calibrate our involvement so that it doesn't limit the ability of others to grow. And I think this is one of the hardest discernments that a leader ever faces. Because frankly, stepping back isn't natural. Stepping back, by the way, isn't about caring less. It's about carrying the work differently. Think about it like this. When you're a leader, you start to worry, if I step back, will the work be done as well as if I was involved? Or will it be done on time? Will it still reflect the kind of excellence that I'm helping drive toward every day? Well, these are honorable concerns, and they're one of the things we really have to pay attention to. And they come from genuine care. But at some point, if you want to step from manager to executive, you have to realize that you're holding now two commitments simultaneously, one that's familiar and one that's new. You're holding a commitment to today's excellence, but as an executive, you're also holding a commitment to grow tomorrow's team, a team that can be one day independent of you. And if you and I stay too close, then we may actually protect today's quality, but we are limiting tomorrow's capability by making sure that the team always, in one way or another, is kind of dependent on us. So this first shift isn't about letting go of standards, not at all. But it is about creating a team that will raise those standards higher without needing you and me to push them. And this only happens, my friends, when you intentionally release your direct control. Of course, to do it little by little and in the right way and with the right people, but keep doing it until you and I are no longer needed in the same way we were before. And by the way, if you don't think that's hard, that's a sign you haven't tried it yet, because it's incredibly difficult. Okay, that's shift number one. Shift number two of the three essential shifts from manager to executive is to rewire the way you measure and value your own contribution. Now, I'm not talking about how others value. I'm talking about how you and I value ourselves. Because as a manager, we could always know what we did. We knew that we mattered because we could point to things that we produced that day, like my old manager used to say. But as an executive, that proof disappears. I mean, you can't end a day with evidence on your desk of what you did that day, not as an executive. You end the day having influenced decisions and shaped the thinking and steadied people or strengthened the team. Those are all very real and very important things. But if you think about them, they're impossible to measure. And when you can't measure your contribution, well, that can feel incredibly uncomfortable, especially when, as a manager, you were so used to doing it. You see, as an executive, every feedback loop is delayed because the payoff of what we do as executives doesn't show up right away. So until you make peace with this, you may fall into a trap that many leaders fall into, of trying to still feel valuable by staying busy. You know what I mean? You add extra meetings. You insert yourself into the details just to be sure things are going well. You use your energy and force to create motion instead of letting a team take the initiative on their own, right? And by the way, this is not an emotional thing. This is not about being insecure. This is to say, as the team becomes more and more independent, it's about redefining how you and I matter. You see, that's the challenge on us, is to be able to come up with a new way of assessing our own contribution that allows us to feel that we are still a critical part of the team and the larger organization as a whole. So for shift number two, you have to remember this. Executives don't always feel productive in the moment. In fact, many of them would say very seldom in the moment. But they guide, they mentor, they support, they encourage, they do all the things that represent long-term investments. There's an old saying that I've always loved, probably because I'm an older guy, that says, a society grows great when people plant trees knowing they'll never sit in the shade. Well, that's a great metaphor for how you have to think as an executive. Because executive leadership, well, it asks you to do exactly that, to rewire the way you measure your own value and contribution from focusing on today's achievement to tomorrow's capability. Okay, one more critical shift in the transition from manager to executive. And by the way, this one may be the most important. You have to release the need to feel indispensable. And man, did I have to work on this one. In fact, as I said, I think this may be the hardest shift of all. And it is by far the most emotional. You know, for many years, leaders may have measured their worth by being needed. This is a painful truth. Will you let this sink in for a minute? You know, we make sure that we are central. We make sure that we're consulted. We make sure that we are, in a sense, indispensable. And even when we complain about being so busy, the big truth is that somewhere inside of us, there's also a kind of quiet pride in how much other people actually rely on us. Well, when you become a true executive, something strange happens. If you're doing executive leadership well, people actually need you less. That's right. Decisions are made without you, and problems are solved before they ever even reach your desk. And the whole organization moves, and you're no longer the visible engine that drives it forward. And when that happens, we forget what a great thing that really is, because it raises a very human fear. If I'm no longer needed in the same way, I say to myself, do I still matter? And I would submit to you that that's the scariest question of all. So this final shift is the antidote to that question, because the final shift is about letting go of indispensability and learning to trust that your impact and my impact doesn't require constant visibility. You see, executives don't prove their worth by being needed. They honestly prove their work and their worth by what grows without them. So if this transition feels harder than you expected, I want to finish today by saying this really clearly and in the most encouraging way I know how. Nothing is wrong. You're simply in the middle of a big transition, a transition to become a different kind of leader. Because an executive is a leader whose impact is quieter and deeper, and frankly, far more enduring. Now, this is to take nothing away from managers, but simply to make the distinction. Because every manager I've watched make this shift has had to intentionally, almost like an act of will, let go of the version of themselves that made them successful, you know, the one that once defined their value, so that they could step fully into leading in a different way and ultimately becoming the executive they had hoped to be. So when you come to this transition moment, remember, it all comes down to your willingness to choose growth over control, to choose long-term impact over short-term visibility. And the big one, to choose trust over indispensability. And if you're in the middle of this transition right now, all I want to say is don't stop. You're not in trouble and you're not behind. You are in the process of becoming. And the leader you are becoming is one that will be able and willing to go on to have an impact beyond anything you can imagine right now. So stay with it and live with the changes and make it to the other side. And you'll be so glad you did. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Execution Insights, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.